So for our first lesson, it's from Leviticus, and when I first read the translation that Pastor Jeff chose for today, it would be an understatement to say that I was very surprised. But I'm hoping that Pastor Jeff can shed some light on this choice, and I assume it is intentional. But sorry. But basically, I'm surprised because, generally speaking, I am bothered or irked, sorry to use an aggressive word, when others or like other people, or in this case, a text refers to another person, literally a human being, as quote unquote alien. It is literally dehumanizing. So that's kind of the reason for bother. But thankfully, I think the speaker in this passage addresses that particular mindset or framing, albeit indirectly. When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the native born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Maybe this is a recurring theme, but when I read the passage for the second lesson today, I also was very confused. But this time it was because I assumed there was no way that Pastor Jeff was going to get up here and talk about Jewish dietary law. But after a little bit of research, I discovered that the passage that we're about to read from Acts is sandwiched between two larger halves of a longer story about a Roman centurion, as in a Gentile, as in a quote-unquote other, or maybe even quote-unquote alien. In this case, a centurion who loves God and is sent by God to find Peter. Meanwhile, in the passage that we're about to hear, Peter has the following vision. As we read, I invite you to consider what meaning God hoped Peter would derive from this vision, especially in preparation for his encounter with this quote-unquote so-called other. About noon the next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up to the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the heavens opened and something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a large voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." The voice said to him again, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." And the thing was suddenly taken up to the heavens.
I was checking in with a friend a few days ago, just how's it going, what's going on, and she said, I keep moving from anger to anger. She was not talking about her personal life, her family is doing well, her health is good enough. I knew what she was talking about. I've had that feeling as well, and I suspect many of you have had that feeling too. I moved from anger about President Trump's order that's supposed to reverse the establishment of two national monuments in California made under the Antiquities Act, to the anger about the DOJ staffers trying to get into the U.S. Institute for Peace, a private nonprofit organization, an anger deepened by the fact that they brought along FBI agents with them in an apparent attempt to intimidate. I went on from that to the anger of the news that the Arlington National Cemetery has scrubbed from its website information and educational materials about the history of Black and female service members, to anger about Elon Musk's false claim that, quote, no one has died as a result of a brief pause to do a sanity check on foreign aid funding, unquote. When in fact, in South Sudan, one of the Earth's poorest countries, the efforts by Musk and President Trump are already leading to children dying. And that was just yesterday. The story that most enraged me this past week broke for me on Tuesday. It happened on Monday, but I didn't hear about it until Tuesday. The more I've learned about it from the news through the week, the more enraged I have become. On Monday, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents arrested and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a 30-year-old Syrian-born Palestinian activist who's a legal resident of the United States, as in he has a green card. Khalil's lawyer said that ICE agents claimed they were acting on the orders of the State Department to revoke his student visa, apparently unaware that Khalil had graduated from Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs in December of 2024 and is a lawful permanent resident of the United States. His wife, a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant, showed officers documents proving his status. The lawyer said an officer said that they were revoking his green card instead. It is clear to me that Khalil became the target after participating in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. There are no criminal charges, no accusations of violence, just a flimsy claim that his activism threatened U.S. foreign policy. As one commentator put it, under the dusty provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Department of Homeland Security is now seeking to deport Khalil on national security grounds, a legal trick that sidesteps the burden of accusing and proving criminal charges altogether. His case isn't just about immigration. His case is about criminalizing speech. Writing about Khalil's arrest, Heather Cox Richardson said the Trump administration has arrested and detained a legal resident for expressing an opinion that Trump officials don't like, likely using Khalil to launch this extraordinary attack on the First Amendment because they don't expect Americans to care deeply about his fate. Once the principle is established that the government can arrest and jail protesters, though, officials will use it to silence opposition broadly. That was her conclusion. Apparently, President Trump agreed, because on Monday, just after noon Eastern Time, he posted, "This is the first arrest of many to come." And sure enough, on Friday, a New Hampshire man with a green card was detained by immigration officials at Logan Airport when he came back to the United States from a visit to Europe. He's being held by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement at Central Falls, Rhode Island. The story of Fabian Schmidt's interrogation is horrifying, including being questioned for hours, of being stripped naked, put in a cold shower by two officials, and being put back into a chair for further questioning. As I reflected on my anger, as I've listened to my heart pound after reading about these arrests, I've come to realize that my rage comes both from my identity as an American and my identity as a Christian. I'm appalled by the violation of civil rights by law enforcement officers. I'm appalled by the violence perpetrated in my name by government officials. And when I listen closely, I hear my heart saying, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the native born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Once again, the Bible calls God's people to draw a wider circle. I heard one of those calls in our reading from Acts, as Paula said, this story, Paul's vision, comes from into a trance. Paul has this trance, and it happens in the context of a bigger story about this centurion. So he falls into a trance. He sees a sheet come down from heaven holding all kinds of animals. Now in Paul's world, meats, I'm going to talk about dietary law. Paul's world, meats were divided into two categories, clean and unclean. Beef, clean. Rattlesnake meat, unclean. Chicken, ducks, clean. Vultures, seagulls, unclean. Tilapia, clean. Shrimp, unclean. Peter's instructed to get up and kill and eat. As a good Jew, he objects. He's not going to eat food that's not clean. And the voice that he hears tells him 3 times that he should draw a wider culinary circle. The story, of course, takes place in this larger context that Paula mentioned. If you read all of chapter 10, and go ahead and read all of chapter 10, you'll learn that the vision isn't really about food. The vision is about people. A centurion, an officer in the Roman army who nonetheless loves God, is coming to see Peter. Should he be accepted by the community of Jesus' followers? That's the issue Paul is wrestling with. An officer in the Roman army, an officer who leads 100 men who are in the country to oppress the residents. Can he be one of us? And Peter's vision convinces him that the answer is yes. Several years ago, Bixby Knowles Christian Church created this graphic, which is possibly hard to read, so let me read it to you. The Bible is clear. Moabites are bad. They're not to be allowed to dwell among God's people. It's in Deuteronomy 23. But then comes the story of Ruth the Moabite, which challenges the prejudice against Moabites. The Bible is clear. The people of Uz are evil. It's in Jeremiah 25. But then comes the story of Job, a man from Uz who was, quote, the most blameless man on earth. The Bible is clear, no foreigners or eunuchs allowed. Again, Deuteronomy 23. But then comes the story of the African eunuch who's welcomed into the church in Acts 8. The Bible is clear, God's people hated Samaritans. But then Jesus tells the story and shows that not all Samaritans are bad. The story may begin with prejudice, discrimination, and animosity, but the Spirit moves God's people toward openness, welcome, inclusion, acceptance, and affirmation. The biblical witness says that the spiritual practice of welcome is our calling, and I am convinced that building community, beginning with welcome, is a vital form of building for the fire. The only way out is through, and the only way through is together. So why did ICE move Mahmoud Kahil away from New York to Louisiana? To separate him from community, to separate him from his family and his support system. We need each other. We need to exercise the spiritual practice of welcome and with. In a time when people in all 3 branches of the government are devoting massive amounts of energy to weaponizing the forces of the government against people they deem to be unworthy of protection, we need each other. Brandon Graphius, I'm guessing that's how he pronounces his name, asked himself, what would it look like if I focused the next few years on figuring out how I could support the most vulnerable people among us? Who are the people most likely to find themselves under attack over the next several years? How can I aid people who are already doing justice work? Well, Brandon lives in Michigan, and he decided that in his context, LGBTQ plus people are vulnerable, and especially LGBTQ plus youth. He says, instead of hoping that the next election will fix our problems, we can use the institutions we're part of to build supportive connections that directly impact the lives of targeted people and individuals. One of the greatest dangers in this moment of chaos, disruption, and destruction is that we often feel isolated, doubtful that the world needs the times and talents that we have to offer. A powerful way to put that feeling aside is to work to build connections, not just between individuals, but between organizations. And so he's working on connecting his church with a Michigan organization on adolescent sexual health. Quoting the Reverend Lindsay Joyce, Graphius writes, churches that engage in organizing can be particularly transformational as members work with those outside the doors of the church to advocate for justice. By the church affirming that justice can happen even outside its doors, it affirms that the struggle for liberation is something that everyone, Christian or not, can participate in. Well, Joyce's view asks us to give up on the idea that only good things in the world come through the Christian church. And this view also mobilizes us to find common cause with people of any faith and no faith who share the same values of supporting people in need. So I found myself wondering after listening to what Brandon had to say, I find myself wondering who are the targeted groups in our context? Who are the targeted groups in the Tri-Cities? And what are the organizations we could reach out to in an effort to exercise the spiritual practices of welcome and with? About 3 weeks ago, a guy named Dan White Jr., who I only know as a friend of several friends on Facebook, posted a list of 10 ways that the first century church resisted the violence of the Roman Empire. It's a good list. I did modify number 1 on his list, but this is his list. Fidelity to Christ as emperor, not Caesar. Gathering together regularly to share meals, caring for the stranger, the widows, and the poor, living with joy and gratitude despite circumstances, repaying evil with good, practicing generosity toward the needy and the sick, showing kindness to their enemies, refusing to compromise to idols, choosing simplicity over excess, praying daily with persistence. When I look at this list, I notice that numbers 2, 3, and 6 are examples of exercising the spiritual practices of welcome and with. And I realize that I need the community built with welcome and with in order to exercise the other 7 forms of resistance that Mr. White has found. The only way out is through, and the only way through is together. As Harriet Tubman would say, keep going. Amen.